Well, welcome. What a great group. It's wonderful to see everybody. And I just wanted to share a little bit about how this all came about. And it's one of those things I noticed under COVID, a lot of things that happen normally in our community kind of go underground. We're not doing a lot of performances, and we're not doing groups and gatherings and concerts. And so I wanted to somehow, bring that out. Libraries are a center of culture. So I wrote a grant, and I want to thank the Pennsylvania Humanities Council for the grant, because that's enabling these programs we're doing called Points of Culture. And they were able to offer us some money for equipment and things like that. So this is a great way to pull this together, and we're doing various topics in this series that have to do with things related to culture, music, art, theater, film, those kinds of things. And so I'm really excited to have Carl Rahkonen here with us, because as I say, when he comes to the library, he packs the house. So Carl has very graciously for many years been doing an Irish music concert in the middle of March, which this year was right about the time we shut down, and I really missed that concert. It's a highlight of my year. So Carl, we're just really happy to have you here tonight, and he has some really great information about fiddling, which is an understated way of saying he's an awesome musician. And love to hear him play violin, but fiddling is the way I guess we want to talk about it tonight, and a little bit about the history in our county and some people who really have connected with fiddling and given some great gifts to our area and our local people. So Carl, I'm going to pass it on over to you. And I also just want to ask if people would just up in the upper right corner, if you could click on the little dots and click stop video. It would probably help Carl not freeze up in the middle of a presentation when all the video is going, and it kind of saps the bandwidth. So just put your name up there and we'll know who you are. Thank you. Except for Helen Jo. Maybe you want to see her. But Carl, you have just been researching a book and doing all kinds of interesting things, and I'm going to let you introduce the topic.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that warm introduction, Kate. Can everyone hear me? If you can't, just pop it in the chat and we'll see what we can do, help that way. Actually, this topic that I'm going to be speaking about tonight goes back a long ways in my personal research, at least. Back in 2001 and 2002, I had a formal sabbatical, and it was during the summer months, to go and study fiddling. And my original intention was to go to Finland and study my grandpa's fiddling and finish fiddling. But I had a daughter who became ill and was in and out of the hospital and so on. So I asked the provost at IUP, could I stay home and do this? Could I study fiddling in Pennsylvania and in West Virginia? And in a certain sense, that was one of the greatest blessings of my life, because I learned so much about the fantastic fiddling traditions that we have right here at home. So let me share my screen here with you. Can everyone see that okay? I guess. Okay, so the presentation tonight is called Fiddling Around Indiana. I'm just going to talk about some fiddlers who are around Indiana, Pennsylvania, not the state of Indiana, even though the state of Indiana has its own thing. Let me say some general things about fiddling. When I had the sabbatical, I went to fiddle camps and events, and that included the Clifftop event, which is like the premier old-time Southern Appalachian old-time fiddling event. It was Nordic Fiddles and Feet, which is the Scandinavian event, which at that time was held in Buffalo Gap, West Virginia, and several fiddle contests and other events in Pennsylvania. And also in the second year, we drove out west and went to Weiser, Idaho to the National Fiddle Competition. So there was a lot there to learn. And what I learned about fiddling, I'm going to kind of summarize here. Let's see if I can. One of the things I went to was the Ashokan Fiddle Camp in Ashokan, New York. And Jay Unger is kind of a famous fiddler. He wrote the Ashokan Farewell. And he found out when he was running that fiddle camp that fiddlers from around the country would come there and they would migrate to various parts of the camp to play their own styles. And what he did was he divided the styles up into northern, southern, and western. Now we know that there are lots of more specific regional styles, but he ran a fiddle camp then for the northern players, for the southern players, for the western players. And I agree very much with Jay that these three different broad areas of style are what we find in American fiddling. And if you look at the map, and I really appreciate geographers, you can learn any one of these styles or a style anywhere in the world today. That's why we have YouTube. You can get on, you can learn about them. But in your geographic region, there seems to be a style that a lot of people play. Northern styles are coming from New England, upstate New York, and from the upper Midwest, where you have a lot of Scandinavians. So there's a lot of Scandinavian influence in their fiddling. And northern styles would be the styles you find in Northern Europe. In other words, Scandinavian, that's Norwegian, Swedish, and Finnish and Danish, Scottish fiddling, which is northern and related to Scandinavian fiddling, and Irish fiddling, which is northern and related to that. We have an additional one in North America, and that's French Canadian. So if you go to the Northern Week at Ashokan, those are the styles that you'd be talking about. Southern fiddling really hits our area because it's the Appalachian style. And some of the differences between northern and southern, one of the differences is the instrument that accompanies the fiddle. In the north, they like to use the piano to accompany, but in the south, in Appalachia, it's the banjo. Now in the west, that's an entirely different thing. This is competition fiddling like you'd see at Weiser, Idaho, and so on. And the main accompanying instrument there is guitar. And this is such a fancy and fast type of fiddling that they don't get a lot of the rhythmic nuances that you get in other things. It's lots and lots of notes. So the guitars provide the rhythm and the backbeat for that. This is just in very general terms. Now, in our area, we need to know, first of all, is that we are here in Appalachia. These counties are called the Appalachian region, and it's the official map of Appalachia that the United States government puts out. You notice that there's only one state that's entirely in Appalachia, and that's the state of West Virginia. And all of western Pennsylvania, and it extends up to New York State. Okay? Now, look at this next map. At the same time, we are also in the industrial heartland, or something that goes back to the early 90s. I did research with polka bands in Johnstown. We here in western Pennsylvania are definitely in polka country. And what is the polka belt? Well, it is an area that extends from Buffalo, New York, down through Pittsburgh, and definitely Cleveland. Youngstown is a huge area. Sharon, Pennsylvania, huge thing for polkas. And it extends over to Chicago, Polish style polkas, all the way up through Milwaukee and through Wisconsin and up to Minnesota, up to the upper Midwest. This is the so-called polka belt. Now what's unique about our area is if you overlay this map of the Appalachian region with the polka belt region, western Pennsylvania is the only place that is in both regions. And so it affects our music enormously to be both in the industrial heartland, the polka belt, and to also be in that. A good example of that was that Joe Yesolivich lived in Creekside, Pennsylvania, and the next house up the road belonged to Eddie Lashinsky, who was playing in Eddie and the Slovenes. And they got together once in a while and played. I mean, Helen will confirm that Joe had told me that. Okay, now a key person for knowing anything about fiddling in Western Pennsylvania was Samuel P. Bayard. Sam Bayard was a fellow who was born in Pittsburgh, 1908, and he became really crazy about traditional music. He had a good musical ear. I think he majored in music at Penn State, graduated 1934. But in 1928, his parents took him on a trip to Britain, France, and Ireland. And in Ireland, he just went nuts for the music. He really, really loved it. And he found that he had a talent. And that talent was that if a person sang to him or did something of that sort, he could sit down and write it out in notation. And so he planned to go to Ireland and to study ballad singing and so on. So he went to Harvard University, studied with the greatest ballad scholar of the time, and that was a guy named George Lyman Kittredge, got his master's degree in 1936. And his plan was that he was going to be going to Ireland and doing that. But, like I said, he was from Pittsburgh. He had an uncle that lived in Greene County. So he's down in Greene County, and what does he discover down there is right up the road from his uncle's house, there were a couple of fiddlers and singers. And he makes this observation. He says, I could go a long ways away to study folklore, but it was right at my door. So rather than going abroad to study, he stayed home and he studied. In a certain sense, what happened to him was the same thing that happened to me. I was going to go abroad and study this stuff, but I found that the traditions right here on our doorstep were extremely, extremely rich and varied. So his life's work was to collect music and study it from Western Pennsylvania. He returned to Penn State as a professor of English composition in 1945, and he became very involved in folklore and in teaching that, so much so that he was president of the American Folklore Society, 1965-66. He retired in 1973, but he continued to teach courses at Penn State for another 10 years, and he did some work. Okay, so his first book that he published about these things that he collected, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a minute so I can show it to you. Hope you guys can see me. It's this little book here. It's called Hill Country Tunes. A true story was that when I got the fiddle sabbatical and I ended up having to stay home, there was a certain day I went to get a haircut and my barber was too busy. So I walked over to the Free Library of Indiana Free Library, and it was the first time I'd been here 13 years in Indiana that I looked at the music collection in the Free Library. So I'm looking at the music collection, I look up high on the shelf, and I see this red book sitting up there on the shelf, and I pull it off, and I open it up, and I see the title page in here, and it says, Hill Country Tunes, Instrumental Folk Music of Southwestern Pennsylvania. And I got so excited, I almost dropped the book on the floor. I did not check the book out because I knew, I came back to the music library, I knew that there had to have been a copy here as well. So this is what the title page looks like, Hill Country Tunes. It was published by the American Folklore Society in 1944. Okay. Okay, the person who played the most tunes for Sam was this woman, Sarah Gray Armstrong. And so Sarah Gray Armstrong was born and raised in Derry, Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, where she lived her whole life, and died on August 15, 1957, and she's buried in Derry Cemetery, on an unmarked grave, actually. And that's just like 20 miles away from Indiana. Okay, so she came from a family that was known to be very, very musical. And I'm indebted to my close friend Todd Kluel for these photographs that I'm about to show, because Todd got really interested in Sarah's music. Todd is a fiddler who lives in York, Pennsylvania, and he would make a pilgrimage each year down to Cliff Top, which is the great old-time fiddling event. And so he got interested in Sarah's tunes, and he started to do research on her. Here's a photograph of the Gray family, and this photograph came from Ruth Hennigan. Ruth Hennigan, and it believes that these people were not directly related to Sarah, but they're Sarah's cousins down in Derry. So look at this. We have Mabel Millen, who's playing guitar in front, and with her children, Clyde and Helen. Next is Israel Gray. This is Ruth Hennigan's grandfather and Sarah Armstrong's grandfather. He's the fiddle player. Okay, we have Davis Buster Gray, who's playing left-handed banjo. Great-grandfather Davis Gray is on the fiddle, and standing behind him is grandmother Catherine Byrne Gray. Ruth writes, quote, "This is a photograph of the Fiddlin Grays, as they were called in those days. All of the children of Davis and Catherine Gray were musical. None of them were taught professionally. However, they could all play all the different instruments. They played for the enjoyment of it. Anytime a family got together, there was lots of music, and they would break out the instruments, sing and dance, and enjoy playing." And you can see that this picture, coming from Derry, Pennsylvania, probably from around the 1920s, is that. I was struck by the fact that it was a family activity that involved both the women and the men of the family, and the extended family were also involved in music. This photograph is of Israel Gray, Sarah Armstrong's brother, who was struck and killed by a train in 1936. He was deaf and didn't hear the train coming. He was walking along the tracks in Hillside. You know where Hillside is down there in Westmoreland County? And so it's one of the little bits of information that you'd be able to find from a newspaper articles about this family. I want to mention there's another source of a person who did a lot of research in Derry, Pennsylvania. That was Sonia Barclay, who was formerly a professor of history in the IUP history department, and she passed away, unfortunately, at a young age. But she had lots of source material on the Gray family. Okay, Sam Bayard, in his book Hill Country Tunes, makes this comment about that. He says, "The Grays were a family of Scottish descent, but that does not mean, however, that they necessarily knew a repertory of Scottish tunes. They absorbed and preserved the local tradition in which they grew up. And the same could be said very probably for any other musical family living in Western Pennsylvania. In the previous generation, the family had 5 brothers: Charlie, which is Sarah Armstrong's father, Lanny, Dan, Josh, Abe, all skillful at some instrument and accustomed to playing together for dances." That's from the Hill Country Tunes, page 1. The family band was known as the Gray Boys. Several of the brothers worked for a railroad, and they picked up a good number of their tunes from fellow railroad workers, some of them Irish fiddlers. As a young girl, Sarah used to listen to her Uncle Lanny, the most expert fiddler of the group, and the one possessing the largest repertory of tunes, absorbing the music, listening, learning to play it herself. She also used to play the cello, on which she would help the group when they were playing in pavilions, and this is one of the places that they played, according to Bayard, Kist's Grove. It belonged to Daniel Kist, who and built a pavilion there for dancing in the early 20th century. It was right on the outskirts of Derry, and elsewhere other places. Okay, around 1910, Sarah's Uncle Lanny went to live in the Far West, and the Gray Boys ensemble broke up, although its remaining members continued to play individually for dances. By the mid-1940s, all the Gray brothers were gone, but Sarah Armstrong, who began playing around the age of 5, was the sole preserver of her immediate family's tradition. Sarah, accompanied by her daughter on the piano and her son on banjo or guitar, likewise continued playing the old music, either for dances or on occasional or radio or theater program. This is a photograph of Sarah Armstrong and her two daughters, Bertha and Mary. I have inserted a photograph of Sarah's son, Robert Bobby, down here in the right-hand corner. So these were her children. We're not sure which of these exact children played music with her, but we know that they did. On November 5th, 1943, Sam Bayard made his way to the home of Sarah Gray Armstrong near Derry, Pennsylvania. He transcribed 4 tunes that day. He must have really been impressed with her playing, because he returned about 2 weeks later on November 18th, 43, and transcribed 33 more tunes. These 37 tunes would make Sarah Armstrong the principal contributor to the book Hill Country Tunes, which was published in 1944. Now, there are lots of other contributors, especially from Greene County, Fayette County, around Uniontown, Donegal. Donegal is a huge area for fiddling, and he collected these. But Sarah Armstrong was the one who played the most tunes for him. So let's look at some of these tunes. I know that this is probably going to be small on your computer, so I'm just going to call out some of these names. We can see tune number 1B is Johnstown Gals, which is really Buffalo Gals, okay? We can see number 31B is Patty on the Turnpike, but Sarah's version of it was completely different than the Patty on the Turnpike that we know. So Todd Kluel, who had done this, is taken to calling it Patty on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Number 33 is Old Reel, which has become known with current fiddlers as just Sarah's tune. Todd Kluel was so taken with Sarah's tune that he started to study Sarah Armstrong and all of her tunes, and it culminated in a 2005 compact disc and booklet with a lot of the details I'm giving you here, called Sarah Armstrong Tunes Played by Todd Kluel and Friends. Todd is still the expert that there is on Sarah Armstrong. Now, Sarah's tunes contains both northern and southern fiddle tunes. For example, number 35, What the Devil Ails Ya, also known as the Rochester Schottish, which is the first American fiddle tune that I ever learned. You'll notice also some interesting, unusual titles as well. For example, number 58, The Snouts and Ears of America, or number 62, Maggots in the Sheep Hide, or number 94, John Newgrant, Come Home with a Pain in His Head. Okay? Since all of these tunes were learned by oral tradition, many times a fiddler simply didn't know or couldn't remember the title of a tune. You'll notice that many of the tunes just gave a generic title, such as Old Reel, Schottish, or Quadrille. Number 66 is an interesting one. It's called Over the Stump and Back Again. And Bayard makes this insight into how fiddlers name his or her tunes. He writes, the story of Mrs. Armstrong tells concerning this tune illustrates the extremely casual way in which a country dance tune can acquire a new name. On one occasion, when the player was a small girl, her uncle Lanny Gray was sitting in their home playing this tune on his fiddle. And there was a local character in the house next door named Dan Rifle, okay? And he was trying to drive a team back and forth across a stump. The team was reluctant, and Dan was yelling and swearing at the animals with great passion. When Lanny heard this, he at once exclaimed, "There's a name for my tune, Over the Stump and Back Again." Mrs. Armstrong did not state that her uncle had composed this air. In all likelihood, he was merely casting about for some suitable name for it, and this is the title that inspired him. One of Bayard's greatest accomplishments was not just to write down these tunes, but he also traced all of these tunes back to earlier versions published in his tune book. And the way he did this was that Bayard collected tune books. His tune books, his large collection of tune books, are in the special collections department at Penn State. And I spent 12 years writing an article about those tune books called The Vernacular Tune Books of Samuel Bayard at the Pennsylvania State University. It's open access, it's free out on the web. If you Google that, you can download it, look at it. It's a very academic article. But for Sarah's tunes, a lot of these ones with the unusual titles, he wasn't able to find an earlier tune that was similar to that. So they were probably originated locally or maybe even invented by the Gray family. Another way of looking at Sarah's tunes is to look at what kinds of tunes she played. Not surprisingly, almost half or 40% of the tunes were reels, but she also played hornpipes, jigs and quadrilles, schottisches, marches, waltzes, and airs. I'm kind of struck that there are not more waltzes and airs here, but Sam might have been looking, when he was doing his field work, he was looking for the unusual tunes and not the usual ones, okay? So maybe that's the reason that I'm sure that the 37 tunes are just a small sample of what Sarah played in her repertory. She probably knew all of the really standard tunes that were available, and so there's no way to know that. But one thing that's really significant is that Sarah Armstrong did compose at least 3 of the tunes that are here. Number 27, Waltzing with the One I Love, number 28, Dream Song, and number 29, Lanny Tuning His Fiddle. Okay, see if I can go ahead here a little bit. Okay. Now let's listen to maybe one of the tunes, which Dream Song. And I don't know how well this is going to play on your machine, but I'm going to try to see if I can get it to work here. It's this song. Did that sound adequate? No? Okay, well, I might not be able to play these examples for you since I've got just a few of them along the way. So let's maybe have to stick to the text. You can hear my voice, though, adequately, right? Okay. All right, well, we'll go back to that. Let me say that Sarah Armstrong was an excellent example of a Western Pennsylvania fiddler, since her style and repertory were both Southern and Northern. Let's see if I can minimize this. Okay, there we go. Her style was both Southern and Northern. And part of that, we know that she was accompanied by both banjo and piano, and that there were tunes which were known both from the north, from New York, from New England, and also tunes that came from the south. Okay, let me say this about Hill Country Tunes. Hill Country Tunes, the book, has been out of print for many years, and a used copy would fetch a high price today. But there is a digital copy available. All you need to do is to Google Hill Country Tunes, and you'll be able to see that tune book. I wanted to say that this is the group called the Keystone Rebels. As you can see, these are my dear friends. In 2013, we played in Derry, Pennsylvania at Railroad Days. That's me. This Henry Koretsky. This is Todd Kluhl and his wife Barb Schmid, and this is Mark Tamsula. Now these two wonderful-looking large men here on the end with trombones are the great-great-grandsons, direct descendants of Sarah Armstrong. So they came and played on stage with us, at least for some of her tunes. Now, when Sam Bayard continued his research, that Hill Country Tunes came out in 1944, but that isn't where he stopped. And he continued his research from 1948 to 1963. He had a new tool to use, and that was the tape recorder. Tape recorders were just starting to come out right after the Second World War, and he grabbed one of those and he started to record fiddlers and fifers in Western Pennsylvania, which resulted in his second book called Dance to the Fiddle, March to the Fife. It was published by Penn State Press in 1982. It has 695 tunes in their variants, collected from 106 musicians. Okay, and he transcribed some of these from reel-to-reel tape. Now, I got really interested in those recordings, so I got a small grant. The year was the summer of 2001, and I went to Penn State, and I got a grant to digitize those things. That was still a very kind of a novel thing to do. And so I put them all on digital discs. And Penn State has now since put all of those recordings out on the web. You can hear them all on YouTube and see the accompanying material that was in the tape boxes that he recorded. And out of these 106 musicians, he only recorded 31 on the tapes, and about a third of the tunes. The other ones were the ones that he got from private tune books and from other sources that he was able to find. So let me talk a little bit about his recording activity. These were the 31 informants that he recorded on the tapes that are there at Penn State. Notice where the most fiddlers were. Well, Jefferson County, Indiana County, and Armstrong County. This is about half of the people that he recorded came right from our immediate area. And I'm going to go really quick through this. These from the field recordings, what did he record? Well, it's not surprising that the largest number of tunes, there were 273 tunes he recorded, about a third of them were reels, so the percentage of the total. But the thing that really surprises me is the second largest number are schottisches. And who plays schottisches anymore? You have to, only Scandinavians play schottisches anymore. And they're wonderful tunes because no one really probably knows anymore how to dance the schottisch unless you're into Scandinavian dance. I know how to play lots of schottisches because I play a lot of Finnish music. And jigs and hornpipes. And there are far fewer waltzes and rags would be much more common today from these recordings. Again, he was probably self-selecting these things, but still to have schottisches as being the second most common genre is really unusual. Now here are the titles of the tunes that he recorded. About a third of the tunes didn't have a title. They were just called no title whatsoever, or they gave generic titles like quadrille and schottisch reel or waltz. But Haste to the Wedding was played by 15 different informants out of the 31. So approximately half of them knew that tune and played it for Sam. Soldier's Joy, Arkansas Traveler, and Lop-Eared Mule, which is a schottisch, or it can be played in different ways. I learned from Joe Yesolivich, and the other ones. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but at least this is a kind of an interesting way to look at these. Okay, well, one of the people that Sam recorded was A.J. Hoge. And I was going to play you the example of the actual field recording that he had, but the sound is not good. Well, A.J. Hoge says, "This here is A.J. Hoge, and I learned this tune when I was a boy from my dad, and my dad learned it from his dad, and it goes back to the Civil War time." And it was kind of an interesting thing because it shows you how genuinely real those field recordings were. Well, my dear friend Mark Tamsula had found out some things about A.J. Hoge, and you can go out, and I actually found his picture this time when I went out to look. He and his brother Calvin got married on the same day. Not to the same woman, mind you, but on the same day in Slippery Rock in 1921, two different women, but he and Calvin were both fiddlers, and they were both teachers. He lived in Dayton, Pennsylvania, was a principal of Rural Valley High School, and he was recorded, 25 tunes were recorded by Bayard from A.J. Hoge in 1948. I'm so sorry you can't hear that, but if you go out to YouTube, you can hear that field recording. I think just put in the YouTube A.J. Hoge and you'll find find that recording and all the other tunes that he played for him on that day, all 25. Another fiddler that was recorded by Sam Bayard was Harry Tink from Stahlstown. If I could have a conversation with you, I'd be saying, anybody know where Stahlstown is? Well, it's down about only 3 miles north of Donegal, which is right on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It is about 8 miles or 9 miles south of Ligonier, okay? Now, a true story is that when we did a renovation of this music library where I work, we were moving our stuff back in. We had some young men that were hired to help move. And one of the young men asked me, he said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I do research on fiddling and that sort of thing. And then he said to me, he said, I am the great-great-grandson of Harry Tink. And I knew exactly, I just went totally nuts. And he said, would you like to come and meet my dad, who was the grandson of Harry Tink, and he can tell you about Tink. And boy, I said, that would be fantastic. Of course, I wasn't going to go have a great treat like that on my own. I called Mark Tamsula, and both of us drove down to Stahlstown to learn about Tink. What we know about Tink is that he started to play at a young age, and his dad was a fiddler and had the fiddle lying around. Of course, this is a story that you hear so many times when you do this kind of research. And he would get 2 corn stalks and pretend like he was fiddling. Well, one day, the young boy took his dad's fiddle, and his dad wasn't very happy that he took his fiddle. He was going to whip him. But Tink said, let me show you what I taught myself. And he started to play some notes on the fiddle. His dad was so amazed that he could do that he started to teach him fiddle. Later on in life, Tink formed himself a band and played at clubs in the area. In 1936, you can see that a woman named Sidney Robertson came from the Library of Congress, and she recorded 7 tunes from Tink. Now think about this. 1936 is before the Second World War. It's before the time of tape recorders. She had a large, heavy thing that's set in the trunk of the car, just like Alan Lomax used, which would make a disc of these recordings. Okay, so this recording is out on the web from the Library of Congress, the 7 recordings that she did in 1936. In 1957, think about that, that's 21 years later, Sam Bayard showed up and he recorded 13 tunes from Tink, including 2 tunes that he had invented himself. Now, this guy was a real character. I mean, Mark Tamsula could tell us some more stories about him, but my favorite story about him was that let's see, his grandson's name was Norman Grace. And when Norman was about 10 years old, Tink came to him and he said, how'd you like to drive my car up the Ligonier? Now stop and think. That's about an 8-mile drive up, 8 miles drive back. And Norman said, oh man, would I? I'd love to do that. So he hops in the car. Pap is sitting next to him in the passenger seat. And Norman is driving this car down the road. And of course, a policeman sees them and sees this little kid looking over the steering wheel and comes after him, turns on the lights. And Norman says, Pap says, just keep going, keep going. And they go around the square in Ligonier and go back down the road to Stahlstown. Now, that's the kind of character that he was. But another one of those, and really, he is the only, that I know of, Pennsylvania fiddler that was recorded by the Library of Congress in the 1930s. From our area, think about that. Okay, Bayard did another tune book, but it was songs, and he had collected 558 ballads and songs and up to 20 variants of each. And I know he had used a primitive computer program to do the notation and so on, because this was in a contract that he had with Penn State Press. Of his papers at Penn State University in the special collections, this manuscript is missing. It's missing because he had a colleague who was there who had promised to get it published with Harvard University Press, or to see it through, but that never happened. So we have a missing manuscript that would be very valuable as far as research for Western Pennsylvania music that Sam Bayard did. Okay, so I'm going to start with this one, and I'll read most of this because I put this down formally, but people haven't heard this in 25 years. It's rare in life that we find the real thing. That's the way I felt on June 11th, 1995, when I met Joe Yesolivich and his wife Helen. This picture was taken on that day. It was not just that Joe was an old-time fiddler who was actually old, but the fact that he had been involved with fiddling for more than 60 years. Joseph Adam Yesolivich was born March 11, 1913, in the village of Ernest, Pennsylvania, a coal mining town in Indiana County, exactly 10 miles from Indiana Borough, I can tell you that. He lived his whole life in Creekside, just 3 miles from where he was born. Joe was the second oldest of 9 children. His older brother died in infancy, so he became a big brother to his siblings. His father was Lithuanian and his mother was Polish. They were married in Europe and immigrated to the United States in 1912. Since his mother had a brother working in the coal mines in Ernest, they came there for his father also to work in the mines. Joe's earliest musical influence was his mother singing various opera songs, as he called them, and he was surprised that decades later, some of those songs that he had heard, he could remember when he heard them on the radio. When Joe was 8 years old, he heard a local button accordion player there in Ernest, and he was completely taken by the music. So his father bought him the button box for him, and soon Joe taught himself to play perhaps a dozen or so polkas. He became somewhat of a novelty. His dad would take him into town, put him on a bar stool in a bar and say, "See what my boy can do," and then he'd play the button box. Alas, the button box playing came to an end one day when he took the instrument apart and couldn't figure out how to put it back together again. Joe remembers the polkas he learned as being either Polish or Slovenian. During that era, rural western Pennsylvania had a mix of ethnicities, first the Germans and Irish, and later Poles, Italians, Slovenians, Lithuanians, Hungarians, and many others. The village of Ernest was typical in this regard, and the music which was played at various performance opportunities was a mixture from the ethnic makeup of the community. The isolation of rural western Pennsylvania was soon to change. The automobile became increasingly common and made it possible for people to travel over much longer distances. The first time Joe heard his favorite kind of music, which he called country music, was when a traveling group came from West Virginia. He walked the 3 miles from Ernest to Creekside to hear them. The group consisted of a fiddle, harmonica, and guitar, and after hearing them, he bought a harmonica and learned to play it really well. Of course, that's not surprising because harmonica works on the same principle as the button box does. The next significant influence came with radio. In 1926, when Joe was 13 years old, the family acquired their first radio and they listened intently to the broadcasts from the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee. These broadcasts increased his appreciation for country music and introduced him to the sound of truly first-rate fiddlers and other musicians. Joe began working at the age of 14 in a glass bottle factory in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and that place is where the Eberly College of Business sits today. And here's a true story. I was with Joe and his wife, Helen, and I think Helen Joe was there as well, when we were playing at some sort of an Appalachian Studies Association regional meeting down in the Eberly College of Business in the auditorium. And Joe went up to the display case that is there, and they had all these bottles they had found in the construction site on display there, which had come from the bottle factory that was there. And Joe said, "Yeah, I remember that sort of thing." And then he got really sober, really serious, and he said, "I'll bet you I'm the last living person who remembers that, who had worked in that factory." And Joe was about 90 years old at that time. And I think he was right. He was the last living person who remembered that bottle factory. Within a couple of years, Joe joined his father in the mines for the princely salary of $1.54 a day. But that only lasted for a few months since the laws changed and you had to be 18 to work in the mines. Whereas Joe said, "Oh, they threw me out of the mines and I had to wait till I was 18 to go back and work." okay? But his occupation, even for the short time that he did work, made it possible for him to develop his interest in music further, since he earned some money to acquire instruments, and the social contacts in the mine brought him closer with other musicians. At around the age of 16, Joe bought a guitar from a local man for $5 and began to take lessons at a local music shop. Soon he was accompanying fiddlers at square dances. He mentioned that square dances were an excellent place to learn tunes because each piece would be played over and over again many times. And with a good ear, Joe became an excellent accompanist. And he was right up to the last day. And I know he was, and I'll tell you why. I tested him by playing a Finnish waltz in an old-timey style. I knew for sure he would never have heard that tune before. He caught all the proper chord changes the second time through. He knew every chord change. He did it all by ear. By the early 1930s, the old fiddlers he had accompanied had all died. And what's interesting about that was that in doing the Sam Bayard study, I listened to a man named John Miller, who was recorded in 1948 in Creekside. Not in Creekside, but it says in northwestern Indiana County. Could have been up there in Dayton, could have been somewhere there close by. And he's playing Flop-Eared Mule. And in the second part, he plays the open E string with his left-hand finger like this. And when I recorded Joe in 1996, he played it exactly the same way. So I asked Joe, I said, did you accompany John Miller? And he says, Carl, he says, that was so long ago. I don't remember the name of the men that I accompanied, but it probably did. I learned their tunes. That's how I learned all the tunes I know, he said. So that was pretty exciting for me to be able to draw a connection between Sam Bayard's early recordings and the recordings I did almost 50 years later. Okay. By the early 1930s, all the old fiddlers he had accompanied had died, and in order to continue playing at square dances, he switched to the fiddle. He bought his first fiddle for $150, a fiddle he owned throughout his life and played occasionally. He received some rudimentary instruction, but it was quick to point out that he had learned the majority of fiddle styles on his own. In 1931, he formed a group with Glenn Lentz, a local minister, playing guitar, and his youngest brother Ted on four-string banjo. This photograph was taken in 1935. The group was called the Border Ramblers, and they dressed in Western outfits reminiscent of Gene Autry. They played many engagements and were paid, but it was more a hobby than anything else. Joe did know of musicians from his area who went on the road to make money. Men were sometimes laid off in the mines when mechanical mining began. The musicians on the road had a tough life, usually living and sleeping in their cars, and they typically made just enough money to get by. The only way to make a living at it was to get a sponsor and to go on radio, which few musicians were talented enough or lucky enough to do. Before World War II, Joe performed in private homes for birthday parties and christenings, and also frequently as entertainment at mining safety meetings. He said most of the gigs were at mining safety meetings. Occasionally he performed at bars for entertainment and dancing, but didn't like the drinking and the fighting that went on in such establishments. His chief performance venue was for square dances. He said that a square dance fiddler has to have a special sense of rhythm and timing, and he would look at the dancers while playing and pick out the best couple and set his tempo and rhythm to them. It was also important to coordinate the music with the caller. One time he worked with a particularly gifted caller and with a great sense of timing. He asked the caller if he was a musician. He said no. It turned out that he was an auctioneer. In the early days, the caller used a megaphone and the musicians played acoustically as loudly as possible. Joe was drafted into the Army beginning in World War II and spent 39 months serving with the military police. He was stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii, and frequently played guitar for luau's. This picture was taken right in front of his barracks and is the only time he picked up a fiddle during the war. He felt that serving in the war was a good thing since he was a workaholic. At that time, he had already worked 14 years in the mines and had already contracted black lung. It was the same to him whether he died in the war or at home in the mines. He said, and here's a direct quote from the field recording, "I was never afraid of dying in the war since I knew it was just as dangerous to be working in the mines back home. And sure enough, here I was at the front in 1942 when a soldier with a white helmet and with a red cross on it came and asked, if I was Joe Yesolivich. He gave me a telegram that read, "We regret to inform you that your brother Ted was killed in a mining accident." It was at that moment that I realized how important the research was, because this was real life. After the war, Joe returned to the mines, but he also became involved in woodworking, particularly cabinet and furniture making, skills which helped him build and furnish his own home. In 1947, Joe lost his ring finger of his left hand in a joiner accident. Can you imagine that? For most fiddle players, that would have ended their playing career, but Joe said that he still played at a square dance the weekend after the accident, with a big bandage on his finger. He developed a style where all the notes he would have played with his ring finger, he played with his little finger. His intonation suffered a little bit, and he had to modify certain pieces to make them playable, but he continued to play as frequently as before. Occasionally, he wondered how much better a fiddler he would have been if he had kept his ring finger. Joe was also injured in a mining accident in the late 1950s and retired from the mines in '61. When the mine in which he worked closed, he continued to work in his own shop as a cabinet maker for more than 20 years. It wasn't until after the war that Joe became involved in fiddle competitions and festivals. He actually played very few competitions as a contestant, but he was asked to judge at many of them. I've had that experience too. I've played only maybe in 2 contests, but I've judged a lot more. And one of the funniest things was I was out at one of the fairs here in Indiana County judging, and I had a great fiddler who had just got off the stage sitting next to me, and our backs are turned to the contestants. Somebody gets on stage and really plays well. The guy leans over to me and he says, "I just hate it when they play better than I do." And that's a true story. Okay. He was part of promoting and establishing the first old-time fiddling championship in Pennsylvania, which was held in Indiana, Pennsylvania in 1972. Part of the promotion was to have the state lottery drawing at the opening of the event, and that's this photograph right here. It shows Joe and his group, the Rustic Ramblers, playing at the drawing. With the support of the local Chamber of Commerce, the competition found a home in Fayette County Fairground outside of Uniontown, Pennsylvania, in the southwest corner of the state. And if you drive down Highway 119 through Uniontown and you see where the state fairground is, you'll see there's a big sign on the building that says Home of the Pennsylvania State Fiddle Championship. What's interesting about that is that that championship is not the one officially sanctioned to go to Weiser, Idaho for the National Fiddling Championship. It's kind of an interesting thing. It was also at this time that Joe began teaching old-time fiddling. At least 3 of his students went on to become Pennsylvania state champions. And I just talked to Helen Joe today, and she said he had more than 60 students that he taught fiddle. Joe said that any fool can learn to do the left hand, but it takes a real artist to learn to bow properly. He demonstrated for me several different varieties of shuffle bowing appropriate for different pieces, and also for a single piece played in different contexts. Joe does not read music except for guitar chords, and he never played from written music, but he amassed a large collection of fiddle tune books and methods. The reason, he explains, is that many of his students came to him wanting to play fiddle from a standard violin background. If they could understand the style first, which he taught them by ear, it was quicker for them to build a repertory from written music. In the mid-1970s, Joe and his wife Helen began to accompany him on guitar. They appeared together regularly after that. As the name Fiddlin Joe came from a WIUP television program called Fiddlin' Fun with Joe Yesolivich. Joe and Helen performed actively throughout their lives, though most of their engagements were at senior citizen events and rest homes. Both their daughters, Nancy and Helen Joe, took up fiddling, and their granddaughter, Jill, and I learned today their great-granddaughter also took up fiddling and playing music. When the family would get together, all the fiddles and the guitars would come out. I made 3 trips to the Yesolivich home to do formal field recording and interviewing in '95, '96, and in '99. It was difficult to get Joe and Helen to answer questions because they were so enthusiastic about playing. I would tell people occasionally that Joe was the Energizer Bunny of fiddle playing, because once you got him playing, he'd play one tune after another, after another, after another.
there was no end to the number of tunes that he knew and could really play. Okay. Joe played also with local guitarist John Shingledecker from Decker's Point, Pennsylvania. John was a fiddle and guitar maker and also involved with old-time fiddling. I knew John because he had repaired my viola the first few months that I lived in Indiana. And then he'd done my bow rehairing and lots of other work like that. I'd run him out to Decker's Point. But I had no idea what a great musician he was until I recorded him accompanying Joe. Okay. Joe began as a square dance fiddler, and in summing up his career, he said, "I'm still one of the best square dance fiddlers around." From that beginning, which he never lost, Joe reflected changes that had taken place in American and Pennsylvania fiddling over the past century. The family performed at the Ox Hill Fair for more than 55 consecutive years. And I talked to Helen, she says it's over 60 years that they played, and Helen's been playing it for more than 15 years now, too. The Yesolivich family was honored at the 2007 Greenwood Furnace Folk Gathering as heritage musicians. This photo was taken in January of 2007 at IUP in planning for the festival. You can see Joe at the age of 93 propping up his arm and fiddle to be able to play. He said, "Give me something I put my foot on," and then he leaned his fiddle down on his leg and was able to play. Unfortunately, Joe did not live to the time of the festival, which is held in September. He died 4 days after his 94th birthday on March 15th, 2007. His legacy continued with his wife, Helen, and their daughter, Helen Joe, the group called Joe's Legacy, and they played several times at the Indiana Free Library for an event. Helen passed away on January 12th, 2015. Western Pennsylvania fiddling continues today, especially in the work of Todd Kluhl and Mark Tamsula. Todd recorded the compact disc of Helen Armstrong tunes, and Mark Tamsula with banjoist Richard Withers, both from Pittsburgh. Mark is originally from Blairsville, Pennsylvania, so he's a local man as well. Had been systematically recording tunes from Sam Bayard's Dance to the Fiddle, March to the Fife book. They're up to 5 CDs so far, which can be obtained from Mark on his website at Snappin' Bug Records. Okay, so I have given you everything that I have. Do you have any questions? Just unmute and hammer away. Are they in chat?
Hey, Carl, I have a question. When
Sure.
you were talking about the button box, did you mean accordion or concertina?
It was two-row accordion, diatonic.
Okay.
Yeah, they can only play in 2 keys, but they're true story. We had a wonderful button box player in the Irish band Aaron, Ron Hamilton, who now passed away about 5 years ago. He was an absolute brilliant player. Well, his box was lying around, and Jim Brett, who was the guitarist, picked up the box and tried to figure out a tune. Now, when you push you push a button, you push it in, it plays 1 pitch. When you pull it out, it plays a pitch that's a third higher. So they're in thirds. As you go up and down the things, it's not linear like guitar, like fiddle, like piano. It's in thirds. So Jim is struggling for maybe 15 minutes trying to get a tune out of this box. Finally, he puts it down, and you know what he says? He says, "That's like trying to play a baby alligator."
Oh, that's fantastic. I wanted you also to know on the chat that Joe's granddaughter and great-granddaughter are in the group tonight.
Yeah, I hope I did their granddad well, because he was certainly a gem. And as I said at the beginning, he was the real deal. He represented the tradition. Now Joe was just one fiddler. There were others too that I didn't get a chance to study. There was a wonderful fiddler out in Clymer named Joe Gaston, who I only met once, and he was a gentleman. And when Joe Gaston passed away, I went out to his funeral. I couldn't believe it. There were like 400 people that showed up who he had played with. So there were lots of great fiddlers around here that in those days. And as I said, Sam Bayard found more than a dozen really great players in Indiana, Jefferson, and Armstrong counties, and that was in the 40s and 50s.
Incredible. If anyone has a question, you are welcome to unmute yourself at this point.
My only regret was that I wish I could have played you some more of the music, the musical examples. There's a lot of them out there on the internet, but I knew that Zoom is not a good transmission for music, unfortunately. I changed all the settings on my Zoom that would be music friendly, and it still didn't work very well.
Wow.
Any other questions?
Yeah, we're are the Fiddlin Joe field recordings. Where would anybody be able to hear them if we were interested?
Yeah, like I said, in the 2001, I digitized them all, and Penn State did a really cool thing. They put them all out on YouTube. So, in fact, let me do this. Let me share my screen with you for a minute. I'll do that again. Let's see now. I'll pick the right one here. It's the wrong one. Okay, this one. Okay. I wanted to. Okay, this is what they look like.
Oh.
Okay, this is A.J. Hoge actually playing. He begins the tape with Devil's Dream, old number 3rd. And I have it scrolled up here, and I can play it for you, but the sound won't be good because you have to have some kind of a special thing that going back to computer sound to be able to see it. But you see all of the other Bert Starr, A.J. Hoge number 2, A.E. Richter, Wilbur Neal. These were all the fiddlers that he actually recorded. And then singers like Mabel Black. She was a fantastic singer. There's a great family over in Gettysburg that has studied Pennsylvania singing. It's just phenomenal, the work that they're doing. And they're looking at the transcriptions of the songs and learning them. See, literally all of them are out here on YouTube. Okay.
Are your recordings of Fiddlin Joe on here too?
No, actually, that's the one thing I kind of regret. Let me stop my share. Let me show you what I've got. These are the actual field recordings that I have Fiddlin Joe. I did them on cassette tape. And these are still, they play very nicely and very good sound. But the only way that I can digitize these is like I did Bayard's field recordings, is that I have a CD burner here. But my CD burner is problematic. I did a whole disc and it wouldn't finalize, it wouldn't work.
Oh.
Able to get those. So these are not out there, but I want to put them out there in some form or another because they're so much fun and they show how people play. And
yeah.
then I had 2 other tapes. These were tapes that the Yesolivich family had. And Helen told me about these, that these were from 92 and 93. You can see Joe Yesolivich tapes when they went up to New York and they recorded them and gave them a tape of them doing. And I'm looking at these tapes and they've got like 40 tunes on each of the tapes.
Wow.
A lot of tunes. When you stop and think of how many tunes that they could actually play, you know, I'm sure it's into the hundreds.
Yeah, wow. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Hey, Carl, it's Richard Withers. I just want to say thank you. I really thoroughly enjoyed this.
Well, thank you for joining us. Richard is an expert, fantastic flutist in the Irish band in Pittsburgh, but He's a banjoist with Mark Tamsula, and those two are like virtuoso players in that style of music. As good as it gets. And they've done 5 CDs of tunes from this book, from Dance to the Fiddle, March to the Fife. That has 695 tunes in here. They could still do a few more, and they're all extremely well recorded and extremely well played. If you love that kind of music, you need to look that up. Snappin' Bug Records.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Hey, Carl.
Sure.
Mark Tamsula.
Hey, Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Very good. Very good to see you. Enjoyed your presentation. But,
Didn't recognize it said Galaxy Tab on it.
oh, is my video on?
Yeah, your video's on.
Oh, okay. I thought you should know AJ Hoge's great niece is watching, and I think she's been trying to get on. Maybe would like to talk.
Yeah, I see her. Come on and say hello. I saw that you dropped something here in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation.
I just wish I could have played some of that music of your. He was fantastic. He could really, really get around the fiddle, and being a teacher and a fiddler too. And my understanding was that his brother Clyde was also a fiddler or a musician of some sort, and that they played together. That'd be interesting to explore that. Do you play?
I tried playing in 4th grade, but my father played, my grandfather played, Arthur played, my aunt played. There were a lot of fiddlers in the family.
That's absolutely wonderful, because I used the Yesolivich family and the Gray family, from which Sarah Armstrong came. It's a very similar thing. If it's a family thing, then it lasts. It's a great tradition and a great, wonderful thing to do. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Everyone should be able to unmute and ask a question, or even turn your video back on if you want to wave or say hello.
Hey, Carl. It's Mark again. Were there ever any recordings of Sarah Armstrong?
I know for a fact that there was talk about that, and that they did some home recordings. They were kind of like the ones that Sidney Robertson did. You know, they were discs that had no label on them, and apparently there were some home recordings. No one's been able to find them. They were probably tossed out. Now, what's fascinating to me when I go out and I went out on the web and I listened to Sarah Armstrong's tunes, like that Dream song that she wrote. Now, you know why it's called that is because she had a dream, and her Uncle Lanny came and gave her this beautiful tune, played it for her. She remembered it and then wrote it down. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous air, and I hear it that way. But there's so much flexibility in the way it can be played. It can be played up tempo, it can be played down tempo, and so on. And I had an example of Fiddlin Joe, where he played Lop-Eared Mule, and it was during the 96 recording, where his wife Helen asks him, play it like a reel, play it like a schottisch, and play it like a polka. And he plays one right after another, same tune, in those 3 different dance styles. And that to me says it all, really, is that there's a lot of flexibility in the way this music can be played. So we see a transcription of it, it's only a beginning. The musician has to bring it to life.
I actually think my mom can still play. This is Jill. I'm watching in New Mexico.
Hi, Jill. So happy
Hi.
you could join us.
I know my mom, when she emailed me earlier, I was all excited about this, but I think my mom can still play it all those different ways. And my grandfather taught me the schottish. I play flop-eared mule, the schottish. I can't play it the other ways, but this is our 4th generation one right here. She's doing pretty good. In fact, she competed in a fiddle contest whenever she got to come visit Pennsylvania last summer. But
I see. What's her name?
this is Jade.
Oh, that's Jade. Yeah, fantastic. 4th generation of Yesolivich is playing.
Oh.
Any other questions? I'm really happy to talk about anything. Adam, you have a question? How about Harry? You have a question?
Earl, thank you for honoring my father.
Well, it was my honor, actually, because when you discover just an example, you know, and I stop and think that my recordings of Western Pennsylvania fiddlers just involve 2 or 3 people. When I stop and think that Bayard had over 100 that he sat down and transcribed tunes, 100 people, stop and think about that. That's really amazing, the work that he did, but it took him his entire life. I mean, he spent, well, he stopped recording people in '63, and his tune book, Dance the Fiddle March for Fife, came out in '82. That's 19 years. That's how long it took to do that book. And it would be wonderful to have that book come out like in a 2nd edition in notation that can be played and seen. You know, I think that people would just eat it up. It'd be fantastic. Richard could do it. He's great.
I'll put it on the list.
All the other things we need to do.
Did you run across many songs from Indiana County?
Well, that's the thing, was that he had even just as large a book on songs. And yes, there are, what I was struck by were the Amish songs. There's Amish songs on there. And the other thing, if you listen systematically to those recordings, half of them are fifers. And fantastic fife playing. And I know you're a flutist and you like that sort of stuff. And it was amazing, because his final conclusion about that was that the fife tunes and the fiddle tunes were interchangeable. In other words, something you could play on fife or the fiddle, you could play in a slightly different style and play it for a dance or do it that way. Go out and listen to some of the tapes. I think that there's a lot more there. I'll tell you something. When I recorded Joe first, I thought, well, you know, he plays a little out of tune. That was because he was missing this ring finger. How can a fiddler play without that finger? I mean, that'd be hard, you know. Then, you know, he was well into his 80s when I first met him, and so your hearing is not quite as good, your reflexes are not quite as good. So one day he called me and he says, I want you to transcribe music. And I said, yeah, I can do that. I'd even have taken a class in that. So he said, will you transcribe for me this one waltz that I played? I want my granddaughter Jill to be able to play it. She can read music. So I sat down and I really listened, every measure, listened to it. And that was the first time I realized how rich his playing was in the nuances that are there, that I didn't hear the first time. It's when you really sit down and transcribe a piece that you say, oh, I can write, these are the notes that he plays, but that's not how he plays it. He adds so much more. And you know what I mean by the nuances. Irish playing is full of those nuances. You can play Irish music, you know, from the tune books till you're sick, but you're not going to learn to sound like an Irish player unless you play with Irish players. That's the bottom line. And the same thing with Scandinavian, the same thing with old time music. Now the thing was that my reflexes, because I'm trained as a classical violist, my reflexes are the best for Scandinavian music on the fiddle. But I played bass. That's why I played bass with the old time band, because then you could learn them. And I know so many fiddlers that learned a whole repertory of tunes because they accompanied people. Joe is maybe the chief example. And I learned literally all of my Irish repertory playing bass with Terry Sabo and Larry Perkins, because they would play every year at Coyne's Pub, and I was playing bass for them, and I heard all of those tunes. Of course, I heard them the way they played them, and not the way real Irish players play them. So you can play the music, but you don't get the nuances that are there until you really study it. Make sense? Well, we're way over time. I'm sorry for keeping you so late, but thanks.
Thank you, Carl. I've invited everybody to unmute to give you a round of applause, which I think we need to do.
Thank you all very much for coming. As you can tell, I'm real enthusiastic about this. Kind of an old one. I've been studying the last after I'd done the fiddling sabbatical, and I'd done that from about 2005 to the present. I've been studying Finnish American music, and it's fascinating. It's really, really, really fascinating. But in the same way that Western Pennsylvania traditional music is.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful gift. We will
Thanks,
be
Carl.
posting, we'll post
Thank
this
you.
on YouTube and on Facebook so you can share it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank you
great.
for coming.
Good night all.